Hey, Salesforce admins, are you ready to get hands-on with the brand new Salesforce Diagrams? That's right. There's new tools available to you to create meaningful diagrams of the work you're doing in Salesforce. Today, we're going to sit down with Tom Leddy, Architect Evangelist, and he's going to teach us more about what resources are available to us with diagramming, why we should diagram, and even how to get started building your first diagram. As always, please make all purchasing decisions based on currently available technologies. Let's go meet Tom. Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Super excited to have you here. I love the things you've been working on here at Salesforce. And I know you and I know the work you've been doing, but maybe not all of our admins know you yet who are tuning in on our video today. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to our Salesforce admins?
Sure, I would be happy to. So I'm Tom Leddy. I'm an Architect Evangelist at Salesforce. So I'm on the Architect Relations team. And some of the work that I do is, my team helps to create tools and resources for architects. We have a trusted destination for architects, architect.salesforce.com. And specifically, some of the things that we've been working on are our Salesforce Well-Architected framework, and then some diagramming videos that we just recently released on our YouTube channel.
Awesome. And I have been following your diagramming videos, and that's really well architected is amazing. And we're going to spend time talking about that in another venue. But the diagramming videos really got me thinking about admins and admins being responsible for creating documentation and the role of diagramming and great documentation to share things you're working on and plan to work on and share the architecture of your implementation. And so I would love to learn more about what you've been working on with diagramming and what maybe some of the things you've uncovered through this diagramming project.
Yeah, that would be great. And I think you hit on a great point about admins using documentation to talk about their system, what it's doing, how it helps a business. And diagrams are kind of the same thing. Like if you're an admin, you're probably doing a lot of the same things already. Diagrams are just doing it visually. And I know traditionally we've associated diagrams with architects, but I found that almost any stakeholder is really going to be a lot more receptive to an idea that you want to share if you can share it as a picture, as opposed to a big list of process steps or a really long paragraph that they're going to have to read. It's a lot easier, and it makes things a lot more portable as well. And some of the things we've specifically been doing is we actually have our own diagram framework at Salesforce, which we never had in the past. So we're kind of trying to standardize on the look and feel of diagrams and the way that they convey information, with the idea being that if I create a diagram and I'm working on a project either as a contractor or as whatever my role is, and then I move on from that project and then hand everything over to you, you should be able to take my diagram and look at it and read it without having to call me and ask me about it. And you should be able to interpret what I put together and whatever the information is in that diagram, and then be able to kind of hit the ground running without having to take a bunch of time to onboard yourself onto a project and learn everything.
And so I love hearing about the standardized Salesforce diagram. I think many admins, I know myself as an admin, have the experience of, I think I've used PowerPoint to do arrows and boxes and try to illustrate an approval workflow, for example, or, the flow of a approvals process, or, trying to do many bullets on a long text sheet to say, here's what this approval process or this workflow or this business process is going to accomplish. Is there a great use case for diagramming? Does diagramming have to be for something that's a more complex implementation, or is there anything too small to diagram?
Actually, no, there's not. And that's a great question because, I can tell you a story too. This is a personal story about me. So when I first started creating diagrams, if I'm going back a few years, I used to try and look for the most complex processes I could find, or the most complex architectures or whatever. And I would create this big diagram that had 35 boxes with arrows connecting all of them. And then I would go through and I would present it to somebody, and selfishly, part of the reason why I was doing that is because, the idea that somebody's looking and, wow, if you could really figure all that out, you must be really smart. And at the end of the day, that doesn't really help anybody, because even if they're thinking that, which the reality is they're probably not, they're just going, okay, great, I don't know how to read it, but thanks for doing that. But the reality is, if you start simple, and even if you've got like a 2 or 3 step process, or you've got your org, and you've installed a few AppExchange components, and you just want to show how they're related to each other, that's actually a good way to do that, is to show it visually. And I don't think there's really anything that's too small to diagram.
So there's a ton of opportunities for admins to diagram both simple and complex parts of their implementations or their planned builds.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, and when you start to get more complex, and we can get into this, but the other thing you would want to think about is, who's the actual audience for your diagram? Because one thing that I had done, that it's probably been a lesson learned for me over the course of helping to put this framework together, is you don't want to put too much information into a diagram. And if you end up with a diagram that does have like 35 different boxes in it, and you're trying to show process steps and system information and all these different pieces of information in one big diagram, your best bet is actually probably to break it out into multiple diagrams, and think about who your audience is for each one, and what do you really need to show that particular audience.
Well, and you bring up a really important point, which is considering the audience. So I know we've talked a little bit about diagrams as a form of documentation. So creating an artifact that can live on if you're not there to explain it, and people can understand exactly what you mean. But can you tell me a little bit about other places where a Salesforce admin might benefit from having a diagram, like other types of meetings or stakeholder engagements where a diagram might be beneficial?
Yeah. Anytime you want to communicate something to executive stakeholders, for example. And if you think about, if I'm talking to like a C-level executive about what Salesforce can do with opportunity management, would be one example. Like, that executive level stakeholder is not necessarily going to need to know every single step of how an opportunity moves through its various stages, but they are going to want to know where opportunity management fits within Salesforce, and what other capabilities it's related to, and maybe if there's another system that gets handed off to over time, and then what the benefit is for that of your business. So you could draw out a diagram that has your Salesforce org. It's got the different components within it of you've got leads and contacts and accounts and how they're all related. And then when you get down to it, now you've got somebody that's actually going to be responsible for doing the hands-on build work for opportunity management. Now you'll create another diagram that does go through specifically those process steps, and kind of explains what do you need to build at a little bit lower level. So there's 2 different groups of stakeholders and 2 different diagrams.
Well, I feel like our admins have heard us talk about diagrams now. They're probably really excited to see some of the places they can start getting hands-on with diagrams, and maybe what some of those first steps might look like if they're newer to diagrams, or even if you have been building a ton of diagrams, some of those Salesforce template tools that Tom mentioned. Can you show us look at some diagrams?
Okay, so right now we're in Lucidchart, which is a diagramming application that you can create a free account online if you want. The free accounts have limited functionality, but you can use all of the Salesforce diagramming shapes. The other thing that I will add is, if you go to architect.salesforce.com, you can look at our how to diagram pages, and there are links to download all of these shapes and import them into other diagramming tools. So if you're not a Lucidchart user and you've got another preference for another diagramming tool, it doesn't mean you can't do this. It just means there's an extra step of downloading the shapes from our website and importing them into your tool. And if you are using Lucidchart, the first thing I'm going to do is actually add the Salesforce shapes. So if you look right here, we've got all the kind of standard Lucidchart shapes. If I click this shape library and I scroll down and find Salesforce architecture diagrams, there's a bunch of subheadings. If I just click the top level one and click use selected shapes, it will add them to my palette. So now I see I've got my header, I've got cards, some product logos and icons. And I can, from there, I can just kind of start dragging these things out. So if I've got my header and I want to make a title, I can give it the description. And then from here, if we were to diagram, I know we've talked about maybe process flows. So usually a card will represent a process step. It could also represent like an entity within your diagram. I'm going to change this and make it a solid line. And if this is step one, and let's just make a quick step two, and then usually some processes will usually require you to make some kind of decision. So let's grab this. Depending on the outcome of that decision, we're going to add step three. And maybe we've got step 3A if it's no. Flip. And from here, we're just going to kind of draw our arrows. And we're just going to connect all the boxes. And the rest of these, the way the arrows work are kind of a preference for yourself. So if you want your arrows to bend, if you want the shapes to go one way or stay straight, that's all options within Lucidchart, and whatever diagramming tool you're using will probably have some similar options to it. Let's and this is really the main way that we're going to do this. I'm not going to keep drawing all these out, but and if you notice, whenever I click this, it kind of opens the side panel. This will allow me to do a few things. So if I want to add a header icon, for example, and I want to specifically say that this step is happening in Marketing Cloud, for example, I can do something like that. And maybe this one is happening within Sales Cloud. So maybe somebody is filling out a form in Marketing Cloud. It's sending information in the Sales Cloud. And I can also add what's called attributes. So if I want to add some additional details about this step, so I can add a list and I can add as many attributes as I need to add here, so that in addition to just saying, here's what happens, I can say, here's what happens, and here's a few other things you might need to know about this specific step and why it's happening, and why it's happening in this order, or anything else that just might be useful for a stakeholder to know. And then the last piece we're going to add here is, let's add some footer icons, and maybe let's actually add a metadata footer too. So a metadata footer, you can say things like, so this is happening in Sales Cloud, but who actually owns this step, maybe across, maybe this step here is, it's the marketing team that's responsible for it. And then this step, it's maybe sales operations because it's happening in Sales Cloud. And after whatever this step is that happened in Marketing Cloud, your sales operations team needs to follow up with it. And then footer icons are where we can add a little bit of additional information. So maybe there's an AI, maybe there's something that involves AI in here. So we're going to add the little Einstein icon, and we're going to add it also up here, just to let people know. It's kind of this up in the top right-hand corner is your key, where you're going to explain what AI. This is where you're going to explain what all the footer icons down here mean. And this is obviously a very simple diagram, and we didn't really go into any details about what all of these steps are, but it really is that simple to start making a diagram. And like we said before, your diagram, your process could have just as few as 2 or 3 steps, and it's still good to diagram it out, because when you're sharing this with somebody visually, it's just a lot easier to follow than it is if you are if you're typing out a big long paragraph that says this works by doing this, and then AI comes in over here, and then it does, and then this happens. And maybe this will happen or maybe not, depending on what the system decides. It's if you draw it out visually like this, it's a lot easier to follow along. We breeze through this here a little bit, but there is on our architect.salesforce.com and in some of our YouTube videos, we actually go into a little bit more details about when to use each icon, when to use attributes versus what would go in the metadata footer, for example. And when something does belong up in the key in the top right, and how to arrange the boxes on the screen as well.
Because I think that too is so important when we talk about how it's easier to understand things if you're looking at them visually. Also, the more Salesforce architects and admins are using this diagramming language and format that you all have outlined, that sort of common language, then it also will become easier to understand a diagram right away and then to create diagrams more quickly, because you're like, okay, I know what sort of context I need to add and what space or what type of box I should use or what. So I think that too is really important, for Salesforce admins out there that are thinking about diagramming or maybe do diagramming on their own with their own processes. The more that you can make it easy to read by your peers or by your stakeholders, it'll make it even more useful.
Yes. And the interesting thing is it actually makes it more, it's beneficial for you as well, because we've all been in this situation where we've finished a project, handed it off to somebody else, and then moved on. And then a year later, people are still calling us up and saying, well, can you remind me again how this works? And even if you documented it, and that's probably the most frustrating part, is you're going, well, yeah, I wrote up a document about that and it's on our shared folder somewhere. And the reason that they're not looking at that is because whatever it was just so hard to read or follow along with it. It's easier to just call you and ask you. And now you're moved on to something else and you're busy. If you put something visual like this together and it really is easier to interpret, it should hopefully cut down on the number of, oh, I have to talk about this thing again. I thought I was done with this type of discussions you have to have as well.
So we saw an example of how to get started building diagram with Lucidchart. You shared some of those tools that are now available to everybody to start building these Salesforce branded, kind of Salesforce specific diagrams. What are, for admins that are watching that maybe haven't built a diagram before, what are some great places to start for them? Like, what should they do next to find something to diagram?
I would say the best thing to do really is start with the most straightforward process that you have. If you probably do have some really complex processes, I'm almost guaranteed that you do. But if you're first starting out diagramming and you haven't made a diagram before, think about those processes or something that is really easy, either whether it's a process with just a couple short number of steps, or if it's a system, if you've got an org that has maybe a couple app exchange components in it and you want to just show how those are related, but something that maybe only has 2 or 3 boxes and you just want to get used to using the tools and connecting all the shapes together and figuring out what a good diagram looks like. I would say start there and then kind of go up from there and start to get into the ones that are a little bit more complex once you feel like you've mastered using the shapes.
Well, thank you so much, Tom, for diving into diagrams with us here. If you're watching, don't worry. I will link all of those resources Tom mentioned in the show notes. So just make sure to visit the listing for this video on admin.salesforce.com, and we'll have links to Tom's YouTube videos and the architect diagrams so you can get hands-on with diagramming today. And thank you so much for joining us today, Tom.
Thank you, Leanne. This was great.
I hope you're all ready to get hands-on with Salesforce diagrams and start building diagrams of processes, business processes, workflows, anything that you're working on in Salesforce. And like Tom said, nothing is too small to diagram. So pick something smaller to start with. If you're newer to diagramming, maybe it's a basic workflow or a basic integration. Pick something simple and start getting hands-on with diagrams and try building one today. Thank you so much for joining us on Expert Corner. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Salesforce Admins, so you never miss a video like this. I will see you next time.